So that's our day. Let me now begin the first session by talking about some of the scientific background and intervention innovation that we have developed as an example of evidence practice. Thank you. A key thing about autism that frames our approach is that it is a developmental condition. It arises early in the first few years of life, and it's an enduring condition, enduring in most cases through the lifespan. And we take a developmental perspective, which means that we try and understand some of the early developmental processes, and we believe that these can have a cascading effect through later years. And and a developmental perspective of this kind can help us understand many of the consequent difficulties and mental health challenges for families and individuals downstream in development. What this developmental perspective leads us to feel is that we need to intervene early, and we need to intervene within a developmental context of understanding these core developmental processes and how to influence them for the best at the earliest possible time. In order for us to do this effectively, though, such interventions need to be embedded in an integrated developmental service provision, and I'll help to show you about what I think this could be later in the talk. Thank you. So our early developmental approach, for reasons that I'll explain, is focused on particularly on the family, and it is a developmental intervention working with parents to help their interactions with their child and their understanding of their child's communication, to optimize those early family contexts and family experiences for the child, which we know are key for later social development. So we work with the parents. We expect as a result of that, that the child will optimize and change their own social experience and behavior. And then through that, then they will be able to generalize out those acquired skills and new learning and improve sociability into other contexts. That's the hope of the kind of intervention we do. Thank you. So we call this a parent-mediated intervention because we work with you, those of you who are here as parents, we work with you as parents. And we do this because it's the natural context for social development. And we understand those developmental processes, both in neurotypical and in autistic development. Also, there are spin-off values to this. Working in this way helps parents get empowered to understand their child, but also how they can be the best possible parent they, of course, wish to be for their child. It helps them overcome some of the puzzlement and perplexity that is one of the things that characterizes the experience of parents with autism early after diagnosis, improves confidence and hopefully family functioning as well. It's efficient at professional time in the sense that once we've got this process going, really, this is a potential for a 24/7 therapeutic effect for the parent with the child. The child is with the parents, learning social life all the time, of course, in the early years. So if we can get this process going, it's potentially extremely powerful and will cascade beyond the precise therapy time that we use. And it's quite efficient of professional time. The professional is not having to work directly with the child all the time. They are training up the parents, as it were. Thank you. So the particular example of parent-mediated intervention that we've developed and tested is what we called at the beginning the preschool autism communication therapy, because we used it preschool. We now have moved it to say it's the pediatric autism communication therapy because we've used it more into the school years as well. It's a 6 to 12 month program, as I said, targeting these developmental processes. and using video feedback with parents to produce the intervention effect. And that's a key aspect of this kind of work. And you'll hear much more about PACT later in the day and how it operates. But essentially, we use video feedback to work with parents. So they review videos of them working with their child, and we can learn with them about how to optimize those kinds of interactions. And you'll see videos of this later in the day. Thank you. So we've done a lot of 20 years of development and testing of PACT in randomized controlled trials and other studies. And the two standout publications that we've done in the medical literature on the evidence are here in two publications in the Lancet journal. One was 2010, one was 2016. And this was at the time the largest randomized trial of an autism intervention that had been undertaken. And we were able to achieve a long-term follow-up of these children for 6 years after the treatment end. Thank you. So the results, which I'll just briefly characterize for you from these PACT trials, take into account the treatment period and then this long-term follow-up 6 years after the end of treatment. And you'll see in this diagram, and you'll see three diagrams like this, that from left to right at the bottom is time, basically the time from when we start working with families in months through to over 80 months from the start of therapy. And the two lines you'll see, the red and the blue, the red represents the group that had the PACT treatment, and the blue, the group who had a treatment as usual. And we use this randomized trial design, which allows us to compare these two groups very accurately. And this first graph looks at the effect of the therapy on targeted parent behavior. This is what we call synchrony of parent response. And what you see here is that the difference between the two lines, which is equivalent to the treatment effect, the extra added value of using PACT, shows a very high treatment effect during the period of the therapy. And then gradually the two groups coalesce towards the follow-up. This is in terms of the parent behavior. Thank you. Then when we look at the child's behavior with the parent, what we see, again, with the red and the blue lines representing PACT and treatment as usual, is that in the PACT group, the children are socially initiating and communicating more with their parents during the course of therapy. And importantly, what we see in the follow-up over 80 months is that this treatment effect sustains itself after the end of treatment. So the end of treatment is at what you see there on the graph as endpoint. There's no fall off. So something has happened in the developmental process that has sustained itself over this time without any further input from the PACT team. Thank you. And most importantly of all, for us, was that we looked at autism symptoms. And these are really the key behaviors characterizing autism, but not with the parent. This is in other contexts with other people looking at them. So this is a measure really of how they can generalize change. And what we've showed here is that the red line, again, the PACT group, showed a lowered severity of autism symptoms. This is not a magic cure. It didn't make all the autism go away, but it reduced the severity of the symptoms in a way which was significant by the end of therapy. And then really importantly, that reduced symptom severity persisted right through until these children were about 10 and a half at follow-up into middle childhood. So this is a preschool intervention which is resulting in an effect which you can still see when the children are 10 and a half to reduce the severity of their symptomatology. And we do this in a rigorous way. So we know that this is an objective finding in the science, but parent and teacher ratings tend to support these findings as well. Thank you. So with that kind of evidence, we were invited and decided to see if we could adapt this kind of intervention globally into what I was talking about earlier are areas where the care gap is almost 100%. In other words, no kids with autism are getting effective treatment at all. And so, thank you. We partnered with colleagues in Pakistan, in India, and in the University of Liverpool, as long here with us in Manchester, to adapt this kind of video feedback intervention for families in South Asia, in India and Pakistan. Thank you. The way we did this was we had what we call a training and supervision cascade, which allowed us to train up specialists in South Asia, who then were able to work and supervise and support non-specialist workers. And this is the key thing here, which is what we call task shifting, which is that there aren't specialists to deliver therapy in South Asia and other low-income countries. We have to train up non-specialists. And what we showed with this cascade is that we could do that successfully, get them to work with the parents, just like our specialists do here with parents in the UK, and affect the child with the autism condition. Thank you. And we've published various papers on this work in Global Health. Thank you. And in essence, what we found is a very similar effect to what we found in our UK trials. And here are two examples of it. The parent behavior change that I showed you in some of the first PACT graph, and the child communication initiation change. Here, the blue line is the active intervention and the orange line, treatment as usual. And we were able to show in both these cases that these non-specialist workers could produce effects very similar to the effects that our therapists could produce in the UK. Thank you. So now we're doing a big scale-up trial in New Delhi in India, 240 children aged 2 to 9 years. And this is a large international collaboration, which is just getting going now, and really affected by COVID, but we're working hard to keep this trial going. And this will give us a good scale-up measure of whether this kind of thing can be embedded in the health service in India. Thank you. So the final part of my talk is to really address the issue of health system organization. How can we embed early intervention models of this kind in a health system model, an overall integrated health system model, which takes into account that autism is a developmental and enduring condition. It is no point and not good enough just to do a one-off intervention and then say we've done our job. This won't work for a developmental condition like autism. Thank you. So what we've done in thinking about this is to look at the literature on other enduring illness research within the world health literature. This is not within autism, but within other health conditions, which are enduring and chronic. And three key principles come up as necessary for health system response in these enduring health conditions. One is that the sufferers, the individuals themselves with the health condition, need to get expert in its self-care. And this is not, and I put self-management in quotes here, this is not a question of saying to people, go away and look after your condition and let us know if you need some help. This is a very active process of helping self-management, and it needs good education, psychological and system support. And for us in autism, the argument is that our family-centered care constitutes this kind of empowered self-management for the condition. Then we need sustained key working, case management to give families a hand to hold through the complexities of all the agencies they need to interact with, to signpost, and to alert to difficulties. And then we need the possibility of what's called stepped care, which is that when families, as they will often do, and individuals run into difficulty downstream, They need to be able to have timely and efficient access to good specialist care when they need it, and then step down to effective self-management as soon as they can after they've had effective care. And there are many ways in which the development of autism, both preschool and in the later school years, will benefit from such specialist care. We can't give this kind of care to everyone all the time, non-stop through development. There just isn't the resource for that. So what we need is this efficient system of good family management, where they become the expert in the condition, and then good step-up care when needed in an episodic kind of way. Thank you. So these are the principles, and this is how we may apply them within the autism as a developmental condition. Here in this chart, you'll see age vertically. So we start from the beginning, the early years, what we call the prodrome, the years before diagnosis, the diagnostic process, the early core symptoms and developmental process, and then later difficulties and predictable transitions. And the first set of interventions and care management that we need are in this early stage, and what I've called basically the family-focused early management of early development. The preemptive intervention, which we're not talking about today, but we have also developed in our group and tested before diagnosis, then support around diagnosis for parents and families and young people, which again, we're not talking about today, but we're working on. And then post-diagnostic intervention, which is what we designed PACT to be. So this early developmental response to the condition to increase families' resilience and improve the child's adaptation and developmental progress. Thank you. And then later on, children with autism are more likely to develop other associated difficulties of adjustment, of sleep, feeding, concerning behaviors, anxiety, depression, a whole host of other difficulties that often affect children with autism. And this is where we will need additional therapies as we come through to support and respond to these extra difficulties. So this is an integrated care response. Thank you. And what we've got potentially in Manchester, as you'll hear about a bit later this morning, is an integrated system of this kind that can respond to the child's needs through development. So we have this early prodromal intervention, which we call iBasis, which is not yet up and running in full practice and is not yet fully evidenced. Peri-diagnostic support. And then we have the PACT intervention that you'll hear a lot about today, which is focused on this early post-diagnostic period to enhance development. And then later, for the step-up care, we have other programs and treatments that are also evidenced to a greater or lesser extent. In Manchester, we have an intervention, for instance, called Riding the Rapids, which is particularly designed for children with autism who have difficult behaviors. And these can feed in later in an integrated way. This is what we call step-up care. Thank you. Next slide, thanks. So finally, what kind of health system provision do we need to make such a model possible? And this is the aspiration, because as far as I'm aware, this kind of integrated health system just doesn't exist anywhere at the moment. But this is, I think, what we can aspire to. A system which can give us integrated detection and response, and then a system that can use online processes to register, to validate and interact with cases, have family inclusion, symptom reporting, all using online facility, online case management, and then that can trigger us to mobilize specialist step-up services in a timely and integrated way with autism teams in a particular area. all this can be managed if we have a good, flexible, and smart online kind of resource coupled with expertise. And that's what I hope we can develop. And you'll hear more about our efforts to do this within Greater Manchester later this morning. So that's my introduction. That's what we are hoping we will be able to do. And you will judge for yourselves and be able to interact with us as we go through the day into how well we have either succeeded or what else we might need to do. So many thanks for that. Next slide. Just want to acknowledge my collaborators, which is a large group within the PACT collaborating team. Next slide. And thank you very much. Should emphasize PACT is a national collaboration which involved Manchester, but also London and Newcastle sites particularly. So there are some contact details, and I'll leave that up for a short time while I can introduce our next speaker.